Welcome. It's so great to have everyone joining us. I really am excited to be here with you all and to share some of this information we've got for today.
Well, and again, I want to welcome everyone to Ann Moore's presentation of Emerging Trends in 2024, our webinar today with Global Trend Ambassador, award-winning designer, Patti Carpenter. This presentation is part of our Winter 2024 programming to offer a glimpse of some of the information and education that you can experience on site at Las Vegas Market in January. Vegas Market runs from January 28th through February 1st, and we want to invite you to register and be part of the excitement that you can see on site at Market. As an enhancement to your Market experience, we want to also let you know about our new At Market app, which is now available for both iOS and newer model Androids. And as a buyer in the app, you will also receive your QR code to print your scan and go badge when you get on site. And it also includes new features such as our market planner, picture and note-taking capabilities, which can link right to your favorite showrooms. And there's much more. So don't forget to download it before you come to market, as you'll definitely want to have that in your hand. I'm Kim Porter, the Senior Programming Manager for Ann Moore. And as Patti goes into the trends that we're going to discuss for the new year, I want to also mention that she'll be with us on site, giving a different take on trends and what is fresh to market, doing Emerging Trends Market to Market, which will be on Tuesday, January 30th. So plan to be there with us, and you can RSVP on our website at lasvegasmarket.com. Patti, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about trends, which everyone is here to hear.
Oh, thank you so much, Kim. It's great to be with everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm very excited to sort of take you through this global trend reportage, which I've gathered together imagery that I've taken from shows around the world, with the most recent ones being literally just down in Miami at the Miami Design Week and Art Basel. I am trying to figure out and wondering if Kim can help me. This bar just popped up and I don't want it to obscure anything if it doesn't have to. And so I was wondering if somebody technically might be able to tell me how that goes away. But let's see what happens if I start to scroll through. And maybe, nope, see, it's still going to be there. Does anybody understand on the tech side how to make that go away? It just popped up while we were talking. If not, I will continue. Um, so,
Somebody might be using closed caption, and that might be what you're seeing.
well, I'm
I
seeing
don't
the
see it
bar
anywhere
there.
else.
Do you have it? Do you all see it?
I do not.
Oh, good. All right, fine. Then that's great. Then it might just be on my computer. All right, wonderful. Well, we're going to talk about so as Kim said, what we're talking about today is our trends that we're foreseeing for 2024 and beyond. And for those of you that haven't been with me to see a presentation previously, the way that we lay things out here at Carpenter and Company is in 4 categories because we really feel that that's the way that you can really sort of distill the trends down and see the big things that are emerging very clearly. So we first talk about color. Then we talk about palettes, the way we see color being used together. We then move from that onto materials, and we go into print pattern and surface design. So as we continue through this, these will be the categories with which you'll start to dissect and see the trends through. I like to start here with spent, which if you saw the little video that I did as we were promoting this, I talked about what this means. Here at Carpenter and Company, we coined this phrase several years ago for a client because everyone always asks, how do you research and track trends? And so here's a way to sort of let you know. First, we talk about the S, which is social. We're looking at all things social, and that can drive down into pop culture, into music, into art, into any kind of culture and dance, whatever is going on, because artists tend to be the ones that have their finger on the pulse of the zeitgeist and sort of lead us often in directions that we may or may not have realized we were ready to go, or or maybe we weren't ready to go, and they're the first ones to take us there. They're truly the early adopters. We then go to the P for political, and that is really all of us being aware on a global scale of what's happening politically around the world, whether it's wars in Chad, or wars in Israel and Gaza, or wars in the Ukraine, or whatever those kinds of things are that are happening. The conversations here in the U.S. about whether or not they want to try and impeach Biden. All of those things are affecting us, whether we want to acknowledge it or even are aware of it many times. But it's the kinds of things that influence us in terms of where we want to spend our dollars, how we want to spend our dollars, and on what. And so as I talk about the dollars, that leads us right into the E for economic, which really talks about, how are we influenced by inflation? The fact that they're not going to raise the interest rates, and we're going to keep them flat, has seen a rebound in the market just in the last day. Those kinds of things free us up to feel a little safer about spending our money. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at from that point of view, from a macro stance. We then move to the N for nature. Certainly, we all know that we're biophilic beings. The idea of nature is really important and intrinsic to us as human beings. And so how is that influencing us? And then last but not least is the T for technology. And certainly I wouldn't be able to sit here and talk with you all today without it. We certainly became very dependent on it as we moved through the pandemic. That has not gone away. It's not going to go away as we talk about AI and ChatGPT. How's that going to affect design? How is that going to affect our design community? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. And that's where we start at a macro level. And so the first place we usually go is color. What do we see happening because of that in color? And I wanted to start off a little differently today and talk about the color of the year with Pantone. And Pantone has listed Peach Fuzz as this year's upcoming color of the year for 2024. Now, I posted this on all of my social media platforms, and I have heard so many different kinds of things. Lots of people talking about how it's a throwback to the 80s. How are we going to use this in interiors? It's not the best color for paint. It's a fabulous color for paint. That's the beauty of it, is that it really opens up this dialogue. And they've been doing this since 1999. So it's really quite wonderful that it continues. And I love the dialogue personally as someone who is passionate about and lives for color. But I did want to point out that for us, we called out something we call daylight, that we just, that is a continuation conversations that we've been having, where we talked about this optimism that this color brings, this warmth that this color brings, this idea of a new day, this idea of a new chance to rejuvenate, to refresh, to reinvigorate ourselves. And so we were talking about this level of color for quite some time. We even talked about it a year ago when we called out apricot stain as a direction that we saw things coming. Now you'll see that this apricot stain is a little more neutralized. Everything isn't going to come out exactly in the same color as that peach fuzz, but it's the idea that we've been looking at this warming side of the palette for quite some time, all the way through. This is us in the beginning of 2023 talking about what we saw for 2024. Actually, it was the end of 2022 where we called out melon baller. And beyond that, we even saw that WGSN in 2022 forecasted a color they called apricot crush. So you see that we're all sort of in the same mind frame about this need for this warmth, this need for something that is more humanizing as we move forward out of the pandemic. So here we go in color. And the first one for us is Blue Skies Ahead. And that was for us really talking about this mid-range of blues, the color of that beautiful chambray that's like your favorite worn-in pair of jeans, this really comfortable and comforting color. We constantly remind people blue's the #1 favorite color of the year. It's always there. So how are we seeing it come through? And here we see it come through in this beautiful mid-range. It's light, it's airy, it's almost like an exhalation. It's reminding us of the world's waters, which is one of those macro trends as we talk about global warming and climate change. The focus on the waters has been really important. So we see even this coming down with fashion, that watery stripe on her ensemble, the edge of the lighting where it's amorphous and organic and almost like water. So we see even some of the design elements relating back to that as well. You will see some fashion figures on some of the boards. I do that when we do our global trend to talk about the way that we see trends coming through not only in fashion for the home, but in fashion for the body, and how often they are influenced by the same thing. And sometimes they come together very closely, and sometimes the way they're interpreted is quite different. But the idea for the direction for the trend is very similar. We then go to lavender light. This was a color that we started seeing about a year ago. Lavender had traditionally not been a color in the US that we saw a lot of, but what's interesting is that we continue to see it. It's been about a year and a half now. If I think about what I started seeing in Europe, here in the US, we tend to like it in a bluer cast because that blue again resonates with us. But what I do want to call out is this use of this one. Well, there's 2 or 3 vendors here that used lacquer, because we hadn't seen a lot of lacquer for a while. We'd seen very matte finishes, but we're just starting to see this lacquer come back, which is for me a nod to the 80s, and I think it's something to watch. It really is a very clean, crisp way to play with color. But then also notice how they've made the new wrappings on the chair on the bottom that would normally be something in a more natural material and natural color coming through in a color. We love when that kind of thing happens, when artisans sort of bring the trend into what they're doing. We then go to frosted moss. This is one of my new favorite neutrals. It's a green undertone to a gray kind of color. We've been calling these the nuanced colors, where we talk about how light play and texture and textiles affects what the color looks like as you see it coming down the runway. Again, I just talked about sort of those comfy jeans, but now here they are, this beautiful new color. This idea of casualness to the color is kind of interesting, but it's a beautiful color that plays back with the entire family of greens, but also moves beautifully over into the blues, certainly with browns and taupes and beiges being the new base colors. As we move away from so much gray, it's going to play beautifully there. So it's a new neutral that we really love. We then, as we dive deeper into this, the green family, we're looking at Spring Sprout. And Spring Sprout is one of those, again, those optimistic colors, those hopeful colors that really encourage us to think about the new day, the new spring, something new coming forward. What's happened here is this was coming off of the mint range we've been talking about. And we see that mint before was quite blue casted. What's happening here is a lot of more yellow undertones, so a more citrusy take on this new Sprout color, which I find very interesting. I also want to call out that single stem in the middle of that vase in the center of the page. This is where we see florals are going into these beautiful single elemental kinds of stems, almost very Japanese in its take. We're moving away from these big, huge floral arrangements in some instances down to these very simple, clean things. I'm going to call out all kinds of things like this on the pages. Next, we go to verdigris, one of my favorite colors. We forecasted it about a year ago. It really is that color of green that comes from nature, because it is the color of green one gets when copper oxidizes. So even for its brightness, its vibrancy, it's a color that comes from nature. And that's one of the things that I loved about it. I also love the way down on the lower right where that upholstered chair has a stain on the wood, so that there's this wonderful tonality happening. We see a lot of that happening in both wood and metal, where the wood color is now being influenced by whatever the upholstery color is as well. I think that just makes it look a bit fresh. And I loved the way that tied back to that gorgeous set of nesting bowls in ceramic with those beautiful angular shapes there in the center, and how that's popped with that same more yellow casted green on the rim. Same as the chair, more yellow casted against the more blue casted. We then go to always greener. This is the grassy trend that we've been talking about, that green grass. What I love about it is the plethora of styles and materials that we saw this very vibrant green coming through in from the boucle on the center chair and ottoman and table on the left, down to the beautiful kettlebell in leather and weights in leather for the home gym at the very high end. We see leather across that whole bottom, actually, with the beautiful handcrafted box and that gorgeous fluted chair, which we just saw at BDNY about 3 weeks ago here in New York. And then completely the opposite is that gorgeous green chandelier up in the top center. We see a lot of hand-blown glass here, and glass in general, hand-blown and handcrafted, speaks to the very high end of craftsmanship with glass, and we're seeing a lot of that come through. We then go to bursts of blue. This is a continuation of cobalt, or the Yves Klein blue if I'm working with the people in Europe. It's something that is a staple. It's always been since Yves Klein sort of sort of named and created this blue. But what's interesting is that this vibrancy continues. This has been around for at least 4 or 5 seasons now, and we don't see it waning. And what's interesting is we've been talking about going back to basics, where we see a great deal of this true blue, a real red, and a true yellow. And that's the kind of thing that, sort of as we talk about after we came through all the anxiety of the pandemic, really going back to basics, laying a great foundation. We go into Little Mermaid. We continue to see the turquoise as being important. Again, note the wateriness of the patterning on her dress that came down the runway, but also that could be considered a kind of camo palette pattern, and we're going to talk about that later as well. But we love this this use of this beautiful watery turquoise, and we've started to see it come through in 2 iterations. If you look to the right of the slide, you'll really see with a more blue undertone, and to the left of the slide, you start to see it with a more green undertone. Again, it's really driven by the materials, by the use of the product, the end product, etc. But it really, all of this really still is there. And again, we named it Little Mermaid as a nod to the film that had such a great impact just recently over the summer. Then we go to deep sea diving. As we talked about getting off the grid during the pandemic, we really talked about getting further out into the forest and further out into water. As we focus on the world's water, as I've been saying, certainly this whole idea of getting out there, cleaning it up, helping nature along, because we've made such a mess of some of this is really very important. So the idea of watery kinds of influences, not only in the color, but even on that piece of glass where she's taken shells and inlaid them in the glass. So you're really, really bringing it home in a very specific way. I love the 2 slides on the bottom, left and right. That's leather, which has been done in this gorgeous color. And then that chair on the top, again, with that tonality of the seating part and the frame being in these tonal combinations, really just kicks that up and makes that have a much more fresh look. We then go to grounded in green. This is this deep, rich, lush, tropical green. We see lots of tropical patterning coming through, big wallpaper with the huge leaves of the jungle being everywhere. And we love it in these leathers that we're seeing down along the bottom. But it's this idea of this really rich, ripe, succulent, saturated green that one finds when you go deep into the jungle, deep into the forest. Then we go to bisque. This is one of our newer neutrals as well. It's again one of those nuanced colors with that yellow undertone to beige. So it's almost a color. It's a colored neutral, and that's what I'm really liking about this. And something like Frosted Moss, you bring a little color in without hitting people over the head with it. Most people aren't really going to be ready for bright yellow, but the idea of this warmth, this undertone of a cast of yellow is really quite beautiful in all of these materials. Then we go to our daylight, and we talked about it, as I said, as this idea of a new day, a dawning, if you will, a warmth and a welcoming kind of a color. And we really do believe that that's going to have a lot of impact. Also one of the nuanced neutrals. And then we go to Golden Oldie. Here's where we see the yellow coming through. It had gotten quite red. We saw it swinging back towards a more true yellow this season, and I found that very interesting. It's a little more whitened and a little more true and clean. It doesn't have that warmth and that brown-red undertone on everything, but that is a way to make it more approachable, is to add that warmth and that red underneath. The true yellow might just be a little shocking for a lot of people, maybe the early adopters, but those others can still appreciate the warmth. And that does have a nod to nostalgia, takes us back to the 70s. Then we go to a new color that we love that we call Caramel Clusters. This is a great neutral, again, with that warmth of the yellow as the undertone. All of this warm side of the palette is going to continue to be important. But what I loved here was that we saw it in so many different materials and all these different kinds of iterations. It does feel very modern. That seating piece in the middle was from the designer of the year. There was a couple at Maison this year, and they did these wonderful things with leathers and metal, slim metal framings. We called it the stiletto framings, but we loved that. But then as you see it up at the top in glass, how you can, make it more opaque or more translucent, also quite beautiful. Then we go to marooned, and marooned is a continuation of this whole wine casted and gourmand direction to colors. And we continue to see this a very blue undertone, very rich again, very saturated. But you do start to see it in shinier and more reflective surfaces than we have seen it in the past. And we are starting to see a lot of glassware coming through in this color, not just glass as objects of art, but glassware for the table. And then my favorite of these is the bruised Beaujolais. I just love saying bruised Beaujolais, which is why I'm wearing what I'm wearing today. But we really love the richness, the depth of this color. It's really this dark, the blues and the reds are almost fighting for which one has the most dominance in this gorgeous color. It is so rich and so wonderfully done. And we just saw it coming through in lots of new places. But again, we did see a lot of it for the table, which I find very interesting. Then we go to really red. Again, as we talk about those basics, that true red, warm and inviting, bold and passionate, really speaking of, for those of us that have a passion about whatever it is we're doing or talking about, this really ties back to those passionate conversations, passionate feelings. Certainly, as we talked about going through the trauma of disease, blood was a conversation around a lot of the tables that I was talking with color people. And so this really is this gorgeous, rich, true red. And then there's this even brighter version that is robust. So this one almost moves over into that digital realm as we talk about the influences of AI and chat GPT and what are we doing in the metaverse, et cetera. This is really that kind of digital, almost neon, very light influenced take on a color. And we're going to see that with a couple of other colors as well. I do want to call out this gorgeous dress that we put on this slide because that's right off out of the Cruise Dior collection. Thank you, Brian, because I have such a connection to artisans and artisan development. And she did this entire collection, the creative director, with artisans in Mexico. The show was held in Mexico, and they actually made by hand that strip that goes across the bust of that piece. And some of these pieces you have to see. They're just stunning. They even worked with silversmiths for the jewelry. They did hats and bags and all kinds of accessories, but they all did them. They did them all with this nod to Frida Kahlo and the cultures of Mexico. And they even had the artisans that worked on the collection at the show. I highly recommend watching it on YouTube. But this for me is also the way that we see trend coming together, where you're looking at those past indigenous cultures and how they are influencing what we're doing today and bringing them together to make a new modern take. Then we go to highlighter, another one of those vibrant colors that I was just talking about with the red, where we talk about this sense of almost glowing like it would digitally. We walked around Maison and started to see this color, and I kept saying, what could I call this? Because I really noticed it a few times before I started actually pulling it together. And then we saw it coming down the runway as well. But it's this idea of this very vibrant color that really is, we have this conversation about pigments versus pixels. And it really is this idea that this is this color that even in real life is going to vibrate almost as though it was on screen. Orangeade comes next, and that's the true, vibrant, wonderful orange. We continue to see that coming through. It's gotten a little softer this season. It is not quite as vibrant. I wanted to call out that is the actress from Killers of the Flower Moon. She wore this gorgeous dress to one of the awards ceremony. So again, here how we see culture coming in and influencing us from that S for social, and as we look at the same kinds of things that we see happening in home, happening in fashion. We then go to terracotta. We've been talking about it for a while. We're talking about it now from the point of view of the material as well as the color, because we always have terracotta things out there, but they've gotten much more interesting. The vessels are much more fun. People are having a great deal of craftsmanship is being brought in to really play. The sense of play is something we're talking a great deal about, but we call this color sort of kind and kindred, where it really resonates with our souls. If you think about ancient cultures, we drank our water from it, we ate off of it, we housed ourselves under the tiles. This is a color we resonate with as humans. I say this all the time, so many of you may have heard that before, but I love what we're seeing coming through in this terracotta color. We then go to whitened. Whitened here again, not a stark, sterile white, but a white that has a touch of color in it, a slight gray, a slight beige, even down on the left in that vase, almost that frosted moss kind of color. We toyed with whether to put it here or there, but it's this idea that there's a subtle color underneath the white that gives it some warmth, that gives it some approachability. It is not off-putting. It is not sterile. Then to gray clay. I have been talking so much about how the brown part of the side of the palette has come through, but we certainly do still have some grays, and they're really quite beautiful. What we like about them, and the reason we called it clay, is it really feels like the clay, the color that comes right out of the earth. It's a very natural gray. It's a very mid-toned gray, and it can play with with so many parts of the palette in other ways. But we love that rug that almost feels like a slice of wood or a fingerprint. The way that the suede stack trays there on the lower right have that modeling because it's suede, so you see the high and the low, again almost feeling like clay. The gray stone in the middle row of the trays there in the middle row on the left. So those are the kinds of things that we really love. And then this tubular structure in the center, where it just really is, it really does feel like they've just taken clay and woven this gorgeous grid. Then we go to taupe. Taupe is the sort of the opposite side of that. So you either have the gray or the taupe. They're about the same weight. They can be used in many of the same ways and against lots of the same colors, but the brown side of the palette really feels fresh to me. The chair on the top right, we just saw at BD&Y. I loved what they did with this because these were chairs that were considering the elderly. This whole idea of being very rounded everywhere was something they talked about. The idea of the light that came from below, so that it wasn't too sharp and obtrusive. So this idea of considering all of us in design, I thought was really wonderful. And then the warmth of the boucle in this beautiful taupe color. Also, this carpet on the top, we're still talking about these beautiful sculpted art-like pieces of art, but I loved the way that those pieces all across the top, from the ceramics to the carpet to the chair, all kind of spoke to each other in a very similar language. Those rounded, curved edges, those forms that are very sculptural. We then go to saddle up. We're seeing this brown. Again, we've seen lots of the chocolate browns and the deep chocolate espresso browns. And now we're starting to see this almost yellow undercast coming through even in the brown tones. So some of them are a little reddened, some of them a little more yellow, but it's really thinking about sort of the leather saddles that were unfinished and how they had the highs and lows within them of the tanning because they were so natural. And we loved these colors. This color here is a great neutral. We then went to burnt black, and this was something we were not expecting. Years ago, there was a plethora of black wood that was truly burnt, and weirdly enough, we saw a lot of this in Europe. I have only seen a little bit of it coming through here. It's still a lot of the matte black on wood, but the idea that these were all really burnt was really interesting to me, that artists are thinking of this again. I almost think of it sort of as this scorched earth, that we are sort of burning up what was in an effort to kind of have that Phoenix rising feeling, to create these new products out of something and many of these are recycled and upcycled woods, which makes them even more interesting as well. Then for the metallic we saw this season, which surprised me, we had been over in the brass and bronze area. We had been coining something called bronzino for quite some time, which is sort of like those two pictures in the center with the white and the green inside. But we really started to see a lot more versions of copper again. And you can see that they are kind of varied. They aren't the one on the top is almost more of a rose gold in the lampshade, but I loved that color. It's rich, it's beautiful, it's elegant, it's succulent. That's actually metal next to it that has that coppery finish. I loved the crewel work of the pillow and the needlework, but it is that true copper color. Those gorgeous pieces that are wall art. We see a lot of wall art coming through in those rounded donutty type discs. And here's one of those interplays there. So it's this idea that copper isn't gone away. It's coming back. We saw lots of faucets as well at the new BD&Y show in these wonderful copper tones. Now we go to palettes. The first is the hallowed hues, which is where we see the pales. So those pretty much have stayed kind of stable. There's not a huge amount of difference. What we do find here that makes it look fresh is that it has that turquoisey sort of green as opposed to a true mint green. And certainly we still see a lot of emphasis on that blush color as a grounding, anchoring color here. In hot hues, we see that art sort of feeling, that sense of the 70s and 60s and well, late 60s, early 70s, and even moving into the 80s. It's a fun, optimistic palette, really hopeful. I love that group of lamps that are all marquetry. So each of those is handmade painstakingly to give that beautiful sunburst on the base, and then put with that beautiful rectangular shade. But we definitely see this as a very lively, very happy, very fun palette. Not quite as happy though as happiness hues, which are brighter, more intense. Again, where you're starting to play with some of those colors that could almost have that digital feeling. I could not resist putting my own picture there that was taken in a mirror that we saw in Europe. That's the kind of reflection you get, and it looked just like that gorgeous dolly that was an art piece that was for sale as well at one of the shows. So I love this whole idea. Again, it has that feeling of gaming, of pixelating, of striating, of art, all coming together in this palette. We then move to the opposite side of that with holistic hues. And holistic hues is really about the natural dyes. All of these things were really talked about from the point of view of getting their colors from nature, from actually using real natural dyes on these yarns, silk and wool and linen, and even the clays that are down on the bottom in those wonderfully long, organic, sort of wabi-sabi kinds of shapes for the candle holders, the single taper holders. But it's that idea again of the handmade, the hand infused, the hand touched, the warmth that brings. Then we go to high art hues. And here we were really starting to see a lot of things that were really influenced by the types of paintings that we've been seeing. And I loved the way this dress came down the runway with all that texture. I almost put her on our carpet board as well, but her colors were so perfect for this. But you see a lot of handmade. Note that piece down on the lower right with the hand stitching like a kantha cloth, but now it's got all this other tubing type texture. And we're going to talk about tubing, we're going to talk about tubing later as well. And then I also couldn't resist the new chair on the top from the vendor that usually does polar bears and ducks and things like that, where he talks about the animals in the world that are facing extinction. This year he did all of the Sesame Street characters, and I thought it was just, again, as we talk about childlike and playfulness, really, brought that to the fore. Then we go to the heritage hues, and this is a deeper, richer, more saturated, very earthy palette as well. But I love the way that they play off of each other. And again, the finishes aren't often perfect. I love the group of pillows down on the right and those velvets that are crushed. So you get the high and the low of these rich colors, or the way from Thailand, they did these beautiful lampshades up at the top, but they dip dyed them and painted them so that it's not the natural color, which you're used to seeing these kinds of things in, but now they're playing not only with texture and levels of basketry and beautiful craftsmanship, but now bringing these warm, rich colors into it. And then down on the bottom on the left, I don't know if you're familiar with this brand, but this is a group of women that use old books. And those are books that have been cut. The pages get cut and manipulated and sculpted to make these beautiful objets d'art. And then last but not least is the hot hues, and that is what we call the black and white. There's always black and white. We talk about it all the time. But what was interesting this season was that we see it popped in rooms of color. So on the left, you see it popped against that very intense, almost scaparelli pink. And on the right, you see it against that green that we talked about, the new mint green. And then in the center with the bold, serious yellow. But what I'm loving is that you don't see black and white in any one iteration anymore. Everything can go. So you can have it very graphic, you can have it very pop art, you can have it very cubist, you can have it very artistic. Polka dots continue to be important. I love the two chairs from two different vendors. As you move towards the left, the middle row and the bottom row, two different vendors, but weaving in black and white for an updated and more decor inspired outdoor or indoor furniture. Now we go to materials. The first is metal. We're seeing so much new metal coming out and artistry within it. So we're calling this Forge Ahead. And what you're seeing is manipulation from a very classic way with the screen in the center on the bottom to this chair that's next to it that is metal, that's made to look like a collapsing upholstered cushion. So again, the artistry of what that takes. The top right is one of those beautiful tables by one of the artists that's in our craft section at Maison, where she works only in black metal. And now if you can look inside that coffee table, she's added a stone, this huge boulder sitting inside. So she's really sort of playing with the juxtaposition of materials, hard to hard, but natural hard to manipulated hard. I love that. The silver chair next to it, again, speaks of craftsmanship, the way that the legs and the back of the chair are created in very similar fashions. And just by manipulating the angles, you get the feet to the back. I loved what that was. The caged rocking piece was done again by our designer of the year, but below that from an Italian designer that we saw at Salone Mobile, that gorgeous orange and blue dish made out of crossed pieces of metal. And then in the top left corner, as we continue talking about arches, the way that they've turned the arches upside down and turned them into the legs and the base of those shelving units and tables. We then go to captivating carpets. Those continue to be important. We're seeing lots of them being hung on the wall, but they really are art-inspired, very colorful, really showcasing the mastery of the weavers. Lots of sculpted edges continuing to be important. We know that that's expensive, but the customer has proven that they're willing to pay for it because it really does give them something special and new and very personalized. And the one in the center, or just the second from the right on the bottom. The right one is Castel Jacques, new collections that he's been working on, the fashion designer that's really moved over into home in a great way. But next to that is a Spanish designer that worked with Taiping and did this incredible exhibition in Paris, not at the show, of her carpets that were all inspired by the hand. And she does these incredibly wonderful, bold palettes of color, lots of tufting and texture, mixing of materials. She had wool and silk and hemp and bamboo mixed in, and they were just stunning. Then we go to the Amber Alert, and this was about amber glass. Everywhere I turned, I saw different types of amber glass, whether it was opaque or translucent or transparent, all hand done pretty much. A few of them might have been molded, but I really don't. Only a couple. They really were mostly hand blown, but it was just this idea again of bringing this warmth in. So if you don't have a client necessarily, or a customer that might buy a huge piece of yellow furniture, certainly to bring in this warmth of amber glass adds that color without hitting them over the head. And what's lovely about it is again that nostalgic nod to the 80s, because this was a huge color in the late 70s and early 80s. Then we go to Wooden Wonders. I always like to talk about what's happening in wood. It's one of my favorite materials, and I'm just always so intrigued by how artisans can work with it. This again is all reclaimed, recycled, upcycled, or forested in a sustainable fashion. And you can just see this plethora of design ideas, this really bold way of working with the materials. But note that there's still very much in the mid-range. We are not seeing dark wood coming back yet. We still see it in this mid-range of tones and moving to the lighter side, but not to the darker side still. And then what we did see on the dark side, come to the dark side, Luke, were black chairs. Beautifully sculpted, beautifully crafted black chairs of every iteration you could think of. And it was really surprising because everywhere we turned, it went, oh, another black chair. There was actually an exhibition of black chairs after we had discovered it that we saw, which only a couple of these come from. Most of them come from other shows, just because I didn't want to, to just show the exhibition of black chairs. But it's the idea that this is very sculptural. Again, it has a wonderfully artistic bent to it. It speaks to the craftsmanship of handmade in many of these cases, and they are just stunning. And they fit every design aesthetic you could possibly imagine. We then go from there to the opposite side. We consider to see fiber being interwoven in beautiful ways, lighting certainly leading the way in terms of how people are utilizing the fiber. But I loved these two chairs on the bottom where they're really taking very traditional types of weaving and now bringing color and pattern into it in more updated and decor inspired ways. I love those tubular lights that hang together, and then they have LEDs running through them. The beauty of LED now is that you can pretty much do anything with lighting because it doesn't heat it up. So it really does open up a whole world with this whole idea of fiber. And then that piece on the top that's all hand woven. Again, that was one of our Thailand pieces. That is a gorgeous piece of wall art and quite large. We then go to brute force, and brute force is about this whole idea of cubism continuing to be important. We do see a lot of cement continuing to be used there, or very raw clays, but you can see from seating to lighting to just vases, we're seeing this whole idea of this cubism continuing. We then go to material mixes. I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit because we still have one more category. We continue to see the idea of craftsmanship coming through in material mixes, whether it's metal to glass or glass to metal to wood or glass inlaid with stone with a metal top on the table. Or I love just the 3 different materials in this seating that we saw at BD&Y and that sculptural form. We go to stone cold, which we started to see it, or we continue to see in the last 2 shows, especially in Europe. And we are seeing it come across to the US, a lot of travertine. So this warmth, again, almost yellow to the cast coming through in the stonework. String Me Along is about the texture and the materials of anything that can be interwoven that's not really fiber. So macrame has kind of slowed down in some way, but just this idea of these strings that can be manipulated in a more artistic way, or I shouldn't say because macrame is certainly artistic, but in a simpler form so that you really see the string itself. We started to see a lot of that. You can see it even came down the runway. And again, in that gorgeous grassy green. We see finishing touches. This was something I'm just starting to notice, and I wanted to call it out, which is we've had a lot of sectional seating that had squares or rectangles on the end. We are starting to see this capsule finishing piece coming through, and I just wanted to call that out as a new kind of softer finishing touch as we talk about the importance of circles and circles and rounded edges, which we will talk about as well. We did see this, and I wanted to just make a note of it and call it out for you. Touch Me. How many people out there actually understand the reference? It's from Rocky Horror, for those of you old enough to have loved Rocky. This is really about texture. The idea that we now, as we emerge from COVID, where everything was on a screen, we were separate from each other, we want to reach out and touch our products. So we're seeing lots more high pile, lots more fibers, lots more tufting, lots more fringing, all the, little knotting, all slubby, tweedy textures, high pile that's cut and clipped. All of this is coming through in a way that calls us to engage with the product, to reach out and touch. 3D design is something that is certainly really important, going the opposite way, where we're really mindful of the planet. We're seeing lots and lots of young designers, opting to print their products so that there is no waste. And what's wonderful is the different things they're choosing to print with. So that's Iris Van Herpen, who I love in fashion. She's got this great exhibition I'm going to see in January at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. She's been doing 3D printing on fashion for years, and the Queen of the Netherlands, I think it is where she's from, wore it to a piece of hers to the opening, and it was stunning. You would never have thought of something like that as being made in that way. But next to that figure, which looks like basketry, is actually orange peels that we saw that have been extracted down into the liquid form that can then be 3D printed. And up on the top, in the top left, that is the largest so far, we've been told, installation of 3D printing in Dubai right now. That's been printed out of sand, and those are 3 by 6 meter panels, and there's a huge wall of them. And the whole idea is that every bit of that is natural sand that has a glazing on top that's also natural, that helps it keep its structure, but it can be filed down, sanded down, and rebuilt again with new patterning. It's wonderful. Then we go to voluminous structures. Here's where we had a lot of fun. We saw all of these things that really felt like they came out of games. Again, we see some of this as being inspired by what's happening in the metaverse. This whole idea of rounded and soft and overly round, because it's truly comfortable. You really sink down into all of these things. And I call to mind the red boots that got so much play on social media when they came out, and that they looked very cartoony, because some of this does have this feeling, there's a, this ability to look kind of cartoony, but that's part of it. It's that sense of play, that sense of joyfulness, that sense of optimism. We then go tubing. An extension of that is these big tubes that get twisted and manipulated for furniture. And so we're really seeing a lot of this. I just saw this vase that we added at the bottom right recently. So we see those in art shows as well coming through. I loved how that was ombre'd, though, that the color ombres up. Again, calling you to engage one step further with each thing. As we go to print pattern surface design, the first is ring bearers. We continue to see the stacking. We talked about stacking, we talked about totems, but we really saw it coming through, as you see, in glass, but even down to that lighting piece on the lower right. But we see it in clay there in the center. We see it in wood, the bamboo as it's made on the bottom of the ottoman. So we do still see this idea of stacking up or being the ring bearer. We see Neo Geo. Our pattern play was the talk of Maison in September, and that was one of the trend areas that was done by Elizabeth Lariche. But we really see all of this wonderful new patterning coming through, which I love, because we've had so many seasons of solids. So I think it's going to be really fun to start to see people play with pattern again and again in these bold, wonderful, beautiful colors. We also saw delicate drawings on the opposite side of that. So very kind of ethereal, very soft, very delicate, very open, very airy. So you go from the intentional vibrancy of the Neo Geos into this delicacy of the delicate drawing. And then into right stripes. We're seeing a lot of striping. A lot of them are very simple bicolor stripes, but we do see some intricacy coming through. And you can even see these bolder kinds of checks that are just, that are made by playing with the stripes in a couple of directions, as you see on those two pillows. But I loved the color combination there, because again, it was bright, it was joyful, it was happy. We also continue to talk about, as I said earlier, around we go. Circles are important. Circles, discs, the whole idea of coming together as humans, following all that we've been through on the planet, this rounded edging, taking the edge off, all of these things continue to be really important. And we continue to see circularity being a conversation about how we produce, but also about the form of products as well. And then we go to kind of camo. I call that out later. It's this idea of these colorations within the green family mostly, but not only, that people are playing with these patternings that aren't really, the true stark camouflage, but they have this feeling of that, this sensibility of something that's meant to be sort of camouflaged. And I loved what this looked like. Then we go to the abrasion persuasion. Coming off of that, we really see this whole idea of the beauty of erosion, this heralding of heritage, worn out fabrics that are being reconstituted and reused in different ways. The way that fabrics are treated to break down color that's been applied to them to give that eroded feeling, the erosion on stone statuary, the erosion look of textiles on the seating, and then the actual erosion of the finish of bowls and ceramics and lighting, etc. Then we go to the feeling of form. We've been talking a great deal about as we move forward. This is a very futuristic look, again, taking us forward. We see this whole idea of these beautiful, interesting, intricately formed pieces in every kind of material. That chair at the bottom, one of my favorites, I called it out in my new and noteworthy for Home Accents today, a couple of editions ago, just won the Interior Design Magazine's Best of the Year award. That's from Heller, and he does them in these gorgeous, very simple colorations that feel very natural. But this whole idea of sculpted and formed in very different ways. That bed, I hope you can see it on the top row. It looks like a couple, one laying one back onto the other, was a headboard at one of the linen places at Maison Objet, but it was stopping people in their tracks, and it's just so beautifully formed. Again, speaking to amazing craftsmanship and skill. Then we go to I'm Dying Here, and this is really about how we're going to manipulate color this whole idea of dyeing and shibori and tie dyeing, dip dyeing, shibori, all kinds of dye things that are done by hand. So whether it's on a rug or on textiles or on throws, on carpets, on velvet that you then wrap upholster the chair in, we're seeing them on every kind of material and all kinds of iterations. But it really is, again, that artisanal handmade touch to things that really add this beauty and warmth to our space. And then playing off of the delicates, we also saw a tremendous amount of toile coming back. And that, again, harkens back to the classics. But what's interesting is that when you look at the patterning, it's not necessarily all classic. Right now, Sheila Bridges is having a great run with her Harlem toile, which she's got all of these different licenses that she's been working with, and it's beautiful. And those are, when you look at what's actually what the patterning is, it's people playing basketball and dancing to music, and it's really got its own personality. So we see a lot of that. And the newest part of this we see is the one down on the right, where it's going to have a color behind it, and that's how Sheila shows them, where you're not just seeing the toile itself printed in color on white, but you're seeing a colored ground. So that's it. I made it. I'm a few minutes over, 5 minutes over. But if you need to contact us, we'd love to work with you. If you need something special and specific, we do that as well. But I'm here to answer any questions you might have. And I thank And More and Kim and the Las Vegas market again for hosting us today. And I hope that I've given you some inspiration to take into the new year for 2024 and beyond. So as always, we say, live life colorfully.
Thank you, Patti. And we want to thank everyone for joining us today. I think just from the expression of emojis I'm seeing right now, everyone
I am
loves
too.
what you
Thank you, guys.
represented. So we want to thank you and hope that you have a merry and safe holiday season. And we can't wait to see you at Las Vegas Market come the new year. And join us on site to see Patti as she's fresh from Paris to give us what's new from there all the way to Las Vegas, as she's one of our market pros and will be kind of going around market and seeing what's new and trends there. So thank you again. And we just want to say
if
thank
people
you.
have questions, my email is there. Feel free to reach out or contact me on my Instagram, because I know we don't have a lot of time. So if there's questions that we don't have time to get to, by all means, reach out.
Please do. Thank you, everyone.